Hey guys, and welcome to the first video in our Tkinter Layout Series. In this video, I'm going to explain what this series is about, what we aim to achieve, what we aim to actually teach you, and the content breakdown for the entire series. All right. So basically, we aim to be actually teaching you how to create proper layouts for your Tkinter widgets. Previously, if you've been following our Tkinter series, all right, it's just been about the widgets and how you can actually use them. All right. But we haven't actually focused much on the layout managers in Tkinter and how you can really combine all those widgets together in a neat and organized fashion, all right, that actually looks good and is also practical. Okay, so this is what this series is really about. We're going to be creating projects basically, all right. It's going to be like we're going to create a login page, we'll create a form, and then we'll try to create some actual software, like something this small, all right. So yeah, we'll be doing stuff like that, and we'll basically be teaching you about the layout managers along the way. There are 3 layout managers in Tkinter: pack, place, and grid. So in this video, basically, we're just going to be taking a look at these 3. I'm going to sit down and actually explain these 3 layout managers, and not just the basics. Okay, I mean, I'm going to actually explain each individual option, because if you've been following my previous series, you probably already know what these are, pack, place, and grid. And of course, maybe you've encountered them by yourself. But the thing is, there are actually a whole bunch of different options and a whole settings that you normally don't use, okay, when just placing basic widgets in a very basic arrangement. So in here, I'm basically going to be introducing you to those other parameters, those other options that you can set, okay, and that really are really important when it comes to creating proper layouts, okay. One more thing I want to mention is that you might wonder in our videos that okay, you've made the software, but you made the layout, but where's the working? Okay, like if I make a registration form, then you might wonder, okay, when I click the submit button, I want this to actually get saved in a file somewhere. You might think something like that. So for this, we actually have a separate series, all right. In this, we're just going to be focusing on the layout, okay, the look. So basically, this series is all about Tkinter. In another series, basically, I'll have these exact same videos, but with each of them, there'll be an accompanying video, which is basically about the behind the scenes working as well, okay? Like maybe file handling, or maybe even databases if we get into it, or anything like that, okay? Everything that's basically the back end of the Tkinter software, okay? Tkinter is basically the front end, and the back end is something which we'll take a look at in a separate series, all right? I'll include all relevant links in the description below, so let's get started. Okay, I'm just going to use the object-oriented approach over here, okay? So if you don't know what this is, let me just quickly explain it. I'm just creating a window over here, okay? A class called window. And it's the init function that takes the master parameter. And what is master? Well, master is actually the Tkinter instance root, okay? And then I'll just save this over here like that. Okay, now let's just create a sample widget. Okay, let me create a button, or let me create 2 buttons actually. Okay, B1 for button. And I'll basically use these 2 buttons to demonstrate these layout managers: pack, place, and grid, okay? And we don't necessarily have to use this, okay? I just want to explain the parameters for now, because I might not get the chance to later on, okay? So this is called this button 1, because the thing is, we actually will be using a whole bunch of these, all right? A whole bunch of these parameters, but I can't guarantee that we'll end up using every single one of them, so I just at least want to cover them all over here, okay, even if I can't explain them and demonstrate them, I mean. Okay, so here we have 2 buttons. I haven't actually placed them on the Tkinter window yet, okay? So basically, if I run this, we get this, okay, because I haven't actually used a layout manager on it, so it doesn't know where to put it in the Tkinter window. So let's take a look at place first, because it's the most simplest to explain, okay? It's very simple, very straightforward, and there isn't honestly much to it. So basically, X and Y, that's how place works. It's a coordinate-based system. Okay, you just give it a bunch of coordinates, and it's gonna put the button, the widget, at that coordinate, okay? Now let's try this. Okay, look at that. And by the way, in case you're not familiar with this already, 0, 0 is basically the top left corner here, okay? And the maximum coordinates, okay, which is basically the width and the height, is the bottom right corner, okay? Just remember, 0, 0 is the top left corner, okay? Yeah, so there isn't really much else to place, actually. It's very simple, very straightforward, but the problem is with this a bit that place isn't very recommended, at least not in, not in more serious applications, okay? Like, it's fine if you're just creating something with a bunch of widgets and you don't really intend to use it much or something like that, right? Like, one actually problem that occurs is with resizing, okay? That the problem is that place is not very good when it comes to resizing your Tkinter window, okay? And the reason for this is a bit hard to explain, and you won't really understand this until I actually show you how to do resizing in grid and pack, okay? So once I do that, you'll understand that there's no way you can do the same thing in place, okay? Not realistically, okay? Not in a proper, you might be able to do it if you use some kind of alternate method or some kind of really unorthodox method, maybe, I'm not sure, but pack and grid are the way to go generally, okay? So let's take a look at something else. Grid, or let's take a look at pack first, okay? Pack is actually the oldest layout manager, I believe, so it's pretty popular, okay? And it's, you'll find a lot of old-time users using this especially, okay? Let's pack these two in. Okay, so this is what it looks like. Now let's take a look at some options. Pack is probably the layout manager with the most options, honestly, I think, followed closely by grid. So let's take a look at some of these. We have pad X. Okay, this is used for padding between the widgets, okay? Because unlike a place, we can't actually specifically place these, right? So we need to have some way of basically keeping some distance between the widgets, right? So that's basically what padding does. There you go. See, there's basically about 10 pixels between button 1 and button 2, and there's about 5 pixels between button 1 and the top of the screen, and 5 pixels between button 2 and the bottom of the screen. Alright, so yeah, that's pack is very basic form. Now let's take a look at some other options. Okay, so what should I do? Fill. Okay, let's try fill. Fill is equal to X. I just want to try this first, see what happens. Okay, yeah. So basically, fill over here is basically, it says to the widget that you're free to expand, okay, wherever you want. That's what fill basically does. It says that if there's space available, go ahead and use it. Okay, use that space. So over here, you can clearly see that there's some space over here, right, to the right and the left of the button. So basically, when you do the fill is equal to X, basically it expands in the X direction and basically uses up whatever space there is available. Okay, so that's what fill basically does. You can do fill Y, okay, for the Y direction, or if you want both, you can do fill is equal to both. And by the way, you might have some trouble if you don't import Tkinter like this. If you do the very popular alternate method is actually import Tkinter as tk. So if you do that, you'll need to do this basically, okay, tk.both, tk.x and whatever, okay. So I think it's easier to do it like this, alright, because then you'll run into a lot of problems later on. So yeah. Now there's also the expand option, okay. This is a bit hard to explain, and we'll get more into this as we proceed, but let me just show you what happens, okay. Now let's say it's false, okay, which is basically its default state. Now let me try resizing the window, okay. This is what happened. Basically, it didn't expand along with the window, okay. It retained its previous position. But if I do expand is equal to true, and I resize the window, okay, sorry, and yeah, there you go. It basically expanded along with the window. It's basically increasing the amount of space it occupies along with the expansion of the window, basically. So basically, it's like the window's expanding, so the button's expanding too, okay? Now, if I actually go ahead and change this, you'll actually see this a lot better, I think, anyway. Yeah, there you go. Okay, now it's using that extra space in the Y direction as well. So yeah. And then there's one more actually that I want to show you. One more option. It's called side. Side is a pretty useful technique that we need for placement, okay? Because basically padding and side, okay, these are basically the two things that we can use in in pack to actually position widgets, okay? So there isn't really any other way of doing it. So yeah. Now I'm gonna put this one to the left and this one to the right. See what happens. See? Positioning. There we go. Now, just for the heck of it, I'm just gonna show you this as well. It's the same thing, really. Yeah, it's the same thing, but you won't notice it until I actually do this. Watch. Again, I'm just showing you all this just so you get a feel of how it works. You see the difference? Well, I hope you did, because if you didn't, well, I'll show you this in detail more later on. So is there anything else that I'm leaving out? No, I don't think so. So that's good enough for pack. Now let's move on to grid. Okay? Grid. Now grid is pretty good. Grid is basically something that was introduced later, and it was sort of meant to replace pack. Okay? And you'll often see people doing projects with this because pack is a bit harder, okay? It's a bit harder, and because of that, basically, you'll see a lot of people using grid instead, okay? Grid is, I like to think of it as a combination between pack and place. So basically, it's sort of like positional, like place, like you can sort of pick positions, but it also retains those features from pack, okay? Which basically, allowed it to resize properly and everything, okay? So yeah, and by the way, if you ever wondered why place isn't very good for resizing, it's because place uses coordinates, okay? It uses coordinates, and those coordinates can change, right? So basically, if you wanted, if there was a window of size 200, okay, and you wanted to place a widget in the middle, so you basically said something like, okay, put it at the coordinate 100, okay? That's the middle, right? But the problem is that what happens if you resize this window to 400 pixels? It could cause problems, right? So basically, that's what the problem is. And pack and grid, they don't rely on coordinates, okay? They rely more on like relative positioning, okay? Which is basically why it doesn't cause problems. Okay, so basically grid, if you haven't already guessed, is basically a grid arrangement with rows and columns. Okay, and you can pick which row and column you want it to be on. Sorry, I did that twice. Okay, so let me put this over there, and let me put this in the same row, but in the first column. And basically, you don't need to define some kind of a grid size. The good thing about this is it's all automatically handled. Like the more you basically expand it, okay, like if you were to do column 5 over here, basically it would automatically divide the window into 6 columns, okay, 0 to 5, 6 columns. So you don't need to worry about that. It's all automatic. And yeah, so basically you do whatever, the window will automatically divide itself accordingly. So don't worry about that. So let's run this and see what happens. Okay, there you go. That doesn't look very good now, does it? Well, see, this is where padding comes in. We can use padding here too. Okay, and let me just do that padding over again. And there you go. Alright, okay, good. Bring that back, okay. So now what should we take a look at? Because, I mean, we're still looking at grid, okay? There are more options to cover. So let's try another row, okay? There you go. Now let me explain something here. Basically, what's happening here is that the columns sort of expand according to the width of the widget inside of it. Now let me try this. Let me do row 2 over here, okay? Now you might think that maybe there'll be one row worth of space between these two buttons, right? You might think that, and logically that might make sense. But remember what I said, that the columns, the space, the size or the width, like in the rows case the height, and in the columns case the width, okay? These depend on the size and the width of the widget inside of it. They basically expand to accommodate their size. So if I do this, basically, this happens. Why? It's because there is no widget inside row 1. So basically it's treated like empty space. Row 1 is basically, it's just 0. It has 0 height. It takes up 0 space. So that's why it doesn't really appear. So this is basically the same thing as row 1. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Okay, so there's one more option I want to take a look at. And before we do that, let's just change this back to 1. Okay, now sticky. Sticky is the new option and the last one that we'll be discussing here. And I'm pretty sure it's basically the last important one. Okay, so yeah. Now this is just like the pack's side option. You know, like side is equal to left, side is equal to right, side is equal to top, side is equal to bottom. So over here we have the equivalent is sticky. Now sticky takes 4 possible options: north, N for north, S for south, E for east, and W for west. Okay, so let's try seeing how this works. Okay, that didn't have any effect. Why is that? Well, the reason is that this is actually something important to understand. Basically, I told you before, right, that the rows and the columns adjust themselves to the size of the widget, right? So currently we can't see any change is because there's no free space within the cell. Okay, basically the row 0 and the column 0 cell, okay, like a table cell, that has no free space. So the button can't stick to any side because, or more like we can't see this change because there's no space for it to move. And because it's not moving, we can't see any difference, right? So for that, let me just quickly demonstrate how we can actually see this. I'm going to change this to 30, and I'm going to change this to E. E for east, meaning right. There you go. You see? I changed the size of the button, which automatically increased the size, the width of column 0, which also increased the column, this also increased the column width for this button as well. Okay? That's one thing you have to keep in mind. Okay? That's just one thing that you need to remember, is that even though button 1 size didn't change, the size of its cell still increased. So basically, once there was some free space available, I was able to use sticky to actually move the button. Okay? And that actually reminded me there's one option that I actually forgot to actually discuss, and that's column span. Now let's just take a look at this again. Column span and row span, actually. Now look at this for a second. And don't you think it's kind of unfair? Don't you think that positioning like this will get really hard if button 1 is, like, we want there to be one column, right? We want both buttons to be sort of in sync with each other. But the problem is that one button, because it's so big, is basically ruining the alignment of the second button, right? They look completely out of sync the way they are. And actually, you might not notice this much over here, but I assure you, you will later on. So basically, what we really need to do here is that instead of putting button 2, which is so large, in just one column, basically we don't want that column to overinflate, because then that ruins the alignment. Like, we have one really wide column, then the others are smaller, and this is weird. Okay, it'll cause problems. So basically, for this we have a concept called column span and row span. Okay, you can do the exact same thing, but for rows as well. Let's just discuss columns over here. We'll be discussing this later on anyways. Okay, so basically, since this button is so large, you can just say that how about you take up 3 column spaces, or let's just go with 2. So basically we end up with something like this. Now basically imagine that the screen is divided in 2, okay, and this is the first column and this is the second column. And the reason why button 1 is where it is currently is because it's I think it's basically averaging out. Okay, it's basically sitting in the middle of that first column. That's basically why it is the way it is. So yeah, that's how it works. That's how column span works. So basically we can sort of divide our really big widget into many columns of equal size or smaller size. This helps us basically position things better. Like, let me just further try to cement this concept. Let's increase the column span to 3. Okay, so basically it's like that now, and let's put this button in column 1. because now there are 3 columns, okay? So there, we can do this now. Now, don't you think that's nice? That's already additional functionality. We can now put this button in the center. Okay, we can put it in this, like, sort of center align it with button 2. Now, we couldn't do this earlier because it was just 1 column. Button 2 was just 1 column, but now it's 3 columns. So we can sort of very neatly, arrange our elements, arrange our widgets in a better fashion. So that is the purpose of column span and row span. So again, that's a whole bunch of options for grid as well, okay? And come to think of it, grid might have more parameters. Okay, there's still one major thing that we haven't discussed yet, and which we can't actually discuss until we begin the project, and that is how we actually use the different frames, different grid layouts to all interact with each other. Because what I've shown you is pretty good, okay? You can go ahead and make some simple applications with it. But for proper unity, for proper uniformity within your application, you need to use frames properly, you need to use these layout managers properly, you need to use concepts like nested frames properly, at least with pack, okay? With pack, you really need a lot of frames. With grid, you already have that grid layout, so you only, one frame is more than enough, usually. So yeah, there's a lot to discuss, and as you can see from this video, there's going to be just a lot of stuff. And there'll be a whole bunch of videos, maybe even some bonus videos here and there. So stick around, make sure to subscribe, because there'll be a lot of Tkinter content coming out, and if you're interested in that, then yeah, really. So that's enough for today, and I hope I'll see you in a future video.